Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Speaker, we can do better. And as we work to ensure the tranquility of this great land and the opportunity for those who desire and deserve jobs, I frankly think it is likewise a devastating disaster, a crisis, that the world has not risen to stop the bloodshed in Syria. I realize that we are not ready to engage in war, and I say that we do not have to. Syrian Americans are just pleading for the world to intervene, for Dr. Assad to step down, for the ceasefire to take place, and for the killing of women and children to stop. I join with the administration to ask for Dr. Assad to be removed, and I ask the Arab League, I ask the surrounding neighbors to stand up against this increasing violence. To the Syrian Americans that I have stood with in Houston, I stand with you until Dr. Assad is removed and the violence is stopped. The United Nations was moved toward a resolution of peace, and Russia and China must stop standing in the way and watching bloodshed pour. Remember, children are dying. Dr. Assad in Syria must leave and peace must come. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from California? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
30 years ago today, President Ronald Reagan delivered one of his most important speeches. He delivered an address to Westminster in which he talked about the imperative of our supporting the notion of self-determination around the world, and he called for the establishment of one of the most important national security items that we have in place today. It's known as the National Endowment for Democracy. Mr. Speaker, in that speech, President Reagan said, "We must be staunch in our conviction that freedom is not the sole prerogative of a lucky few, but the inalienable and universal right of all human beings. The objective I propose is quite simple to state: to foster the infrastructure of democracy, the system of a free press, unions, political parties, universities, which allows a people to choose their own way, to develop their own culture, to reconcile their own differences through peaceful means." 3 decades later, the vision that Ronald Reagan put forward in that famous speech is not only alive, but it's well and thriving all over the world. And so I'd like to congratulate all of those who've been part of the effort that was launched by that speech 30 years ago today by Ronald Reagan. And the people all over the world who want to determine their futures, we stand with them in their quest for self-determination.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise it to my remarks.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on July 1, student loan interest rates are due to double. We also have seen numerous very short-term transportation bills as an extended, longer transportation bill, which could give real certainty to workers and firms, is sitting there in the Senate and is ignored by the House. But despite the fact that the transportation bill is sitting there and we haven't taken proper action and student loan rates are due to rise, you wouldn't know it from being on the House floor. You wouldn't know it because the majority has not taken up these issues that are the most pressing issues to the American people. You know, I'm not here to say that the Republicans are sabotaging the economy in order to get an advantage in the election. But there are a lot of people who believe that is the case. If the Republican majority wants to make sure that the people of America know that they're operating on their best behalf, I urge them to take action to preserve low interest rates for students to go to college and to pass a transportation bill and take the one up that the Senate has already passed. Jobs are the key, but you wouldn't know it from being in this body based on the action or inaction of the majority. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the lady from Maryland arise? Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our country continues to recover from the worst recession we've faced in generations. And this progress is being made despite the best efforts of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who stated that their singular goal is not creating jobs, but in making President Obama a one-term president. In the 18 months since they took the majority, the Republicans have had one constant, and that's been to obstruct. Obstruct when it comes to common-sense legislation to move the country forward. Having a transportation bill, passing a long-term surface transportation bill that would put 2 million people back to work. They're obstructing in their unwillingness to keep college loans affordable, making sure that on July 1st, 7 million students across this country will have their student loan interest rate double. They've been obstructionists when it comes to the Paycheck Fairness Act, the simple task of making sure that women who do the same job with the same experience are paid the same money. Obstruction, obstruction, obstruction. And they could have done their part to make things happen for the American people, but they haven't done that. And so, Mr. Speaker, the actions of this Congress will speak louder than words. It's time for the Republicans to show that they're concerned with the American people and not just with partisanship. Stop the obstruction. Let's create jobs for the American people. And with that, I yield.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois arise?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise to extend my remarks.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week I joined with some of my colleagues to introduce the bipartisan Startup Jobs Act 2.0. Mr. Speaker, students come to America from all over the world. They earn advanced degrees in science and technology, engineering and mathematics. Then upon graduation, they are forced to leave our country, forced to go back home and in essence compete against us. And with them goes their knowledge, their ideas, and their aspirations to change the world. Many of these students want to stay here in America, to make something of themselves here, because America is still the best place for ideas to become realities. These ideas become solutions which in turn into job-creating companies. According to a study by the National Foundation for American Policy, immigrants founded or co-founded almost half of the top 50 venture-backed companies in the United States. Since our nation's founding, immigrants have flourished right along with our economy. America becomes richer and more dynamic society by encouraging the best and the brightest from all over the world to set up shop here on our soil. That is why I'm honored to be an original co-sponsor of the bipartisan, bicameral Startup Jobs Act 2.0 that will help America get back to work.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia arise? The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, if Congress were a musical, then the Republicans would be Little Orphan Annie, singing "The Sun Will Surely Come Out Tomorrow." Because with the urgent challenges facing this nation, Americans staring at impending fiscal cliff and economic calamity, the GOP has simply said, maybe we'll get to it tomorrow. Let's revisit the little orphans the GOP has left behind. Needed transportation and jobs bill, the Medicare dock payment fix, the debt ceiling extension, the student loan interest rate hike, the sequester's arbitrary and indiscriminate cuts, the farm bill, postal reform, the expiration of the Bush tax cuts, the AMT taxes, the payroll tax cut, which would collectively cost families $4,000 more next year. The impact to our economy of these poor little orphans is a staggering $7 trillion. The nonpartisan CBO has said failure to act on these will send America back into recession. The Republicans need to recognize that every orphan deserves a home and work with us in responsible bipartisan solutions, or it's going to be a hard-knock life for us. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee arise? The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much emphasis has been put on the deficit, and we do need to deal with the deficit. But at the same time, one way to deal with it is to stimulate the economy. And there's no better way to stimulate the economy than a transportation bill that repairs our infrastructure, puts people to work here in America, and improves the ability of industry to move its product and for consumers to get product. And yet the transportation bill that's been passed in the House and passed in the Senate, differing bills, is stuck in a conference committee. We need to pass a transportation bill and put America back to work with American-made products by American workers. My city of Memphis is a transportation center. We know highways and runways move product and move people and make sense. So I urge our leaders to see that the conference committee comes back, doesn't have extraneous provisions, and does what's necessary to put America back to work and passes the highway infrastructure bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Under the Speaker's policy announced January 5th of 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, recognized for, excuse me, House will stand at ease for just a second. Thank you. The Chair lays before the House the following personal request: a leave of absence for the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Pelosi. And with that,
leave of absence requested for Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island for today after 11 o'clock.
Without objection, the request is granted. And now the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the minority leader. The gentleman is recognized for 60 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for the privilege, and good to get the housekeeping work out of the way. We all like to think about what if. What if I had actually gotten an A rather than an F in that high school class? What if I had hit that home run instead of struck out? The what if game is part of our life, but I want to take that up today in a very, very serious way. This is about what if this Congress, led by our Republican colleagues, had taken up and passed President Barack Obama's American Jobs Act. Last September, the President made a very bold proposal to put Americans back to work. Comprehensive piece of legislation that covered many, many different parts of the American economy. It's called the American Jobs Act. Fully paid for. Not increasing the deficit at all, but paid for with the elimination of unnecessary tax breaks for big oil, unnecessary tax cuts for the extraordinarily wealthy 1% of Americans. A fully paid for American Jobs Act, proposed by the President last September. What if this House, under our Republican leadership, had taken up the elements of the American Jobs Act, modified them as is our nature and our responsibility, but nonetheless passed those very significant proposals that would, according to economists, create somewhere between 1.3 and 1.9 million jobs immediately. Not someday in the future, but now. What if we had done that last September? What if our Republican leadership had allowed those measures to come before the committees and on this floor to be signed by the President? 1.3 million Americans, or maybe even 1.9 million Americans would have a job today. We're going to talk today about the most tragic what if this nation is pondering at this moment. What if the American Jobs Act had been implemented? Let's talk about what it is. What are the elements of the American Jobs Act? Bear with me, if you will. As we go through these, I'll go through them rather quickly, and then we'll come back and touch on them as we go on. If you've been watching here in the gallery, or if you are watching C-SPAN, you would have heard my Democratic colleagues talk about the transportation bill. The President said last fall, we need to have a transportation bill, and we need it now. We need to put men and women back to work in the construction industry, repairing our bridges, building our highways, paving our airports, building the infrastructure that this nation needs. Student aid bill. We know that if America is going to compete, we have to have the best educated workforce in the world. And so the President proposed a student aid bill, legislation that would provide additional sources of funding so students can go to school in community colleges, in four-year schools, and in the master and doctorate programs. The President took up one of the great conundrums and problems that this nation faces from our competitors. Yes, China. China manipulates its currency, and the President said that has to stop. And he asked for the House of Representatives and the Senate to pass a piece of legislation dealing with the manipulation of the Chinese currency, which gives them somewhere between a 20 and 25% price advantage on all the things that they manufacture and import into the United States. He said, do something about that. Give me, the administration, the power to put a tariff on those Chinese goods if the Chinese government continues to manipulate its currency. He said we ought to buy American-made products. We ought to use our money, our taxpayer money, to buy American-made goods. And I have a piece of legislation that would do just that, and I'll talk about that before this hour is done. Buy America. Enhance the Buy American provisions. Do away with the waivers that have created a 12-lane freeway for foreign products to find their way into America despite the laws. The President said that there are millions of homes in America that are inefficient, that leak energy and cost the homeowner or the renter vast amounts of money. He said we could put people to work, putting in new windows, caulking, putting insulation in the attics. We could put people to work and in the process reduce our consumption of energy and create jobs. He said there ought to be a permanent research and development tax credit so that our industries would stay ahead of the competition around the world, so that they would know year after year after year that the research and development tax credit would be there, and the more that they invested in research, the more that they took that research and developed products, the more jobs would be created. And they didn't have to worry that, well, maybe it won't be there next year, so this 5-year research program, we won't do it. No, he wants certainty. His American Jobs Act would have given certainty. But the leadership in this House refused to take up all of those provisions. The President went on and said we need a payroll tax cut for businesses and for the worker. We did a little of this. Businesses didn't get a tax break on the payroll. However, the men and women that do work and do get a salary did get half of what the President proposed. He said we ought to put veterans to work. And fortunately, on Veterans Day last year, we did pass a bill to do that. And we should consider even more. 285,000 teachers have lost their jobs this year across America. The President said that we cannot survive as a stable, growing country with a just society if we don't educate our kids. And so he said, let's put those teachers back to work. 280,000 of them, and police and firemen along with them, so that we would have the public protection. He said that in addition to a transportation enhancement, an additional $50 billion over and above the transportation bill, he said we ought to put people to work and give a jump start. Just like you would with a dead battery on your car, he wanted to put those jumper cables on the American construction industry, $50 billion, get it up and going. And he said we need a permanent infrastructure bank. I'll finish this up quickly because it gets to be a rather long what if. But oh, what if? What if we had done these things? How about rebuilding our schools and houses? Again, putting people to work. And how about allowing Americans to refinance their homes to stop the inevitable decline of the housing industry as more and more people were forced into bankruptcy and losing their homes. It's the American Jobs Act, proposed by the President of the United States last September. And to this day, 2 of those policies have been adopted. What if the economists say 1.3 million Americans would be working today if this legislation had been allowed to be brought to the floor of this House, had been allowed to be brought to the Senate, and the President to sign it. And don't forget this, it was fully paid for. It was fully paid for. The deficit would not have been increased. However, the oil companies would not have $12 billion of your money in addition to what they've taken at the gasoline pump, the wealthiest industry in the world. We'd get our tax dollars back and we'd put people to work. And for those with $1 million of annual income, after all of the deductions, after all of the credits, for those with $1 million of annual income, their taxes would have gone up to pay for putting 1.3 million Americans back to work. What if? I'd like now to call upon my colleague from the state of Oregon, who for years has fought for transportation, one of the senior members on the Transportation Committee. Mr. DeFazio, you were here late last night fighting one of the most foolish proposals I've heard of to cut the transportation budget by $37 billion. Thank you for fighting that fight and informing us. Fortunately, this House rejected that foolish proposal. Mr. DeFazio, please.
I thank the gentleman. I'd just key in on one of the aspects of the President's proposal, and that would be a long-term legislation to invest $450 billion in our crumbling infrastructure. Now, some people will say to me, well, Congressman, I don't work in construction. I say these aren't just construction jobs. We have the strongest Buy America requirements in the area of transportation investments. Underline 2 words, investments and jobs. Now, those investments, if made under Buy America in, say, transit vehicles, involve engineering, manufacturing. They involve, steel manufacturing. They involve sophisticated fabrication of vehicles, of tires for buses, all of those sorts of things. We could put millions of people back to work and begin to revive the devastated American manufacturing sector, and for once, keeping the Chinese from stealing our jobs because of the Buy America protections. But no, the Republicans don't want to do that. They don't really like the Buy America provisions in the bill, and they don't want to make the investments. We were here till midnight last night. The gentleman from Georgia proposed that we end all new federal investment in transportation infrastructure on October 1st. There would not have been 1 penny more. All of the money that he would allow in next year's budget would only be enough to pay for ongoing projects. When the states finish a project, we reimburse them. We authorize the projects, the states build them, we reimburse them. The money that he would limit us to would only pay for projects already ongoing. That would bring it all to a halt, despite the fact the system is falling apart. We're living off the legacy of Dwight David Eisenhower. That's a mid-20th century legacy. It's fallen apart. It needs to be rebuilt. We also need to build out a 21st century infrastructure to more efficiently move goods and people and compete with our competitors. Now, I heard a lot of nonsense last night, and 82 Republicans voted for this today. So this is a problem. The Republican caucus or conference is having an internal war among themselves. They have 82 members who believe the federal government, the people of the United States assembled, the 50 states and territories, should not invest in transportation and infrastructure. It should be done by the 50 states. It should be devolved. That's crazy. That's crazy. In the 21st century, we're going to have a 50-state transportation policy, and how the state's going to pay for it. We tried that until 1956. We had turnpike built in Kansas and ended at the Oklahoma border because Oklahoma didn't have the money until Eisenhower passed the legislation and the federal government could invest. They want to go back to those good old days. And then they prattle on about, well, these are just government jobs. Government, they hate government. No, they're not government jobs. The government does not build bridges. The government does not build transit systems. The government does not build highways, gentlemen. They don't build any of those things. We go out and contract through the states for the lowest qualified bidders under Buy America requirements to build these projects with American workers and American products. So let's stop all this nonsense on the Republican side of the aisle about the government can't create jobs. The investments the government makes can create jobs in the private sector. We have an infrastructure that's falling apart. The President wants to rebuild it. The Senate even wants to rebuild it on a bipartisan basis. But no, the Republicans in the House of Representatives have stopped forward progress on this legislation, foregoing potentially millions of jobs. It's a shame. I only hope that the Senate and the President can prevail on this issue. And I thank the gentleman for bringing this to the attention of the House.
Mr. DeFazio, for years you have been fighting for infrastructure. And I didn't watch last night's debate as you fought fiercely to prevent one of the most foolish pieces of legislation. Well, there have been many foolish pieces of legislation proposed by our colleagues, but you couldn't be more correct. Let me just put this up. I came across this yesterday, and basically what this is, it's a diagram of the employment in the construction industry. And we had about, 5,570,000 men and women working in the construction industry in January. And here we are in May, and we're just over 5,500,000. Yeah. Some 20, almost 30,000 have lost their jobs. And the proposals that our Republican colleagues are making would guarantee that once these projects are finished, it'd be over, nothing more. But the President laid out not only a transportation bill, but he laid out a very robust jump start to it, $50 billion of additional money invested. Now let's understand, this is not government money. This is an investment by the American people. It is their gasoline tax, their diesel tax. It is their investment in the highways and bridges and transportation systems of this nation. Well, I guess if you're anti-tax and you're anti-road, and you're pro-gridlock, and you're guaranteeing that the economy will slow down and eventually, who knows, even collapse. Fortunately, there's a gentleman here from the great Northwest, mid-Northwest, Mr. Keith Ellison. You've been on this issue for a long time, and I know in your area you've been very, very concerned about the issues that are in the American Jobs Act. Please join us.
Well, I want to thank you, Congressman, for making the issue of jobs the front and center issue. We've been here all week long, and one of the things that I find just shocking is that we have not dealt with the issues that are really in front of the American people, and the number one issue is jobs. We haven't dealt with the future jobs that students could perhaps get if they got the education, which is has to do with the doubling of interest rates on student loans, which is due in a few weeks unless the Republican majority acts. We certainly have not taken up the transportation bill that would extend extensive work to people. As many as 280,000 education jobs are on the chopping block in the upcoming school year due to pressure on state budgets. So the bottom line is that this is an interesting week that we live in, because there is no doubt, no one of the 435 members of this body are under any doubt. Student loan rates are doubling, unemployment is record high, and yet we didn't deal with any of these critical issues. I'm really shocked. I'm astounded. I'm under the impression that we're all here to work hard. I'm one of those who doesn't like to sort of imply or even say that the Republicans are sabotaging jobs for political advantage, because it's hard for me to imagine that any true public servant would ever do something like that. But, you know, there's a lot of folks out here who believe that is the case. I want our Republican colleagues to disprove that premise by getting some pro-job, pro-education legislation that we all can agree on. You know, well, another thing that I'm glad to talk about is in regards to the Obama job plan, which you know, under the American Jobs Act, Obama has laid out a plan. He has set forth a set of ideas, and one of the elements that I want to talk about a little bit is the job program for the long-term unemployed. Obama has talked about dealing with the issues of the long-term unemployed. People who've been out of work, and you know, who've been chronically unemployed for a long time, they call them the 99ers. It's modeled after an unemployment program in Georgia. And under that program, workers continue to collect unemployment benefits plus a small stipend to cover transportation and other expenses at no expense to the employer. After 8 weeks of training, the company may hire the person or not, and it could amount to a free tryout. So, I mean, I think that the Obama administration, under the American Jobs Act, is being responsive to the needs of the American people. The same cannot be said for the House of Representatives under the Republican majority. Under the American Jobs Act, the Republicans could bring it up today. Some of these ideas are things that they have proposed, and they won't even take those up. So this is really disappointing. I think people who have been chronically unemployed for weeks and weeks and maybe perhaps years. I talked to a woman who had been out of work for 2.5 years. This woman has a college degree. She is a highly trained professional from my district. You know, if Lauren, if you're watching, you know that I'm talking about you. And I think the the American Jobs Act has just what the doctor ordered if the Republican majority would take it up. I yield back.
Well, Mr. Ellison, in your community and my community, people want to go to work. They want a job. They want to be able to be part of the American machine that creates the wealth of this economy. And they want to have the opportunity to provide the money for their family, take care of the needs. They take pride in their work. They're hard-working people, but they can't make it. And we have a long, long tradition in America that dates back to the very first day of the American modern government. The day George Washington was sworn into office, he undertook an industrial policy. Now, I know our Republican colleagues like to talk about the Founding Fathers. Well, they really ought to listen to the Founding Fathers. And if they had listened to the Founding Fathers, they would have paid attention to the President's proposal on the American Jobs Act, because here's what George Washington did. He turned to his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, and said, Mr. Hamilton, we need to grow this economy. We need to put people to work. We need to be a strong nation, a strong economy. And I want you, Mr. Hamilton, to develop a policy to do that. Hamilton came back a few months later with an industrial policy. About 13 different items on about 5 pages. Now it would probably take 5,000 pages, but nonetheless, he did it. Do you know what was in it? What was in that industrial policy that Hamilton presented to Washington and to Congress and mostly implemented over the next decade or so were policies that, let me put this back up. Let's see here. How many of these were in it? And here's the great what if. There was a transportation part to those policies. In fact, 2 different ones. One, Hamilton said, if we're going to grow this economy, we need to have good roads. We need to have good canals, and we need to improve our ports. And he proposed legislation that did become law, some of it by the states, some of it by the national government, that created the canal systems, put the roads in place, and improved the ports of America. Very beginnings of this nation. Pay attention, my colleagues who like to talk about the Founding Fathers. The Founding Fathers said, we need in America to have a transportation program. Currency reform was on the agenda. Yes, it was. Hamilton, Treasury Secretary, said, we need to pay attention to the currency issue. And there was a huge fight going on at the time about federal bank, about the currency issues, but he said we needed a common currency and we need to be aware of the international exchange rates that were going on so that we were not put at a disadvantage. There was a Buy American program. Hamilton told George Washington, the Founding Fathers, that we needed to put in place a Buy America provision. You just heard our colleague from Oregon talk about a robust Buy American provision. And sometime before I end, I'll talk about my piece of legislation that says if it's our tax dollars, it's going to be spent on American-made equipment and American jobs. We're not going to use our tax dollars to buy foreign equipment. That's precisely what Alexander Hamilton told George Washington and the very first Congress of this nation, and they began to implement it. Energy efficiency wasn't there. He did, however, talk about this one. This was one of the 13. He said we needed to have a robust research and development program. They called them patents at that time. We need to be ahead of everybody else. And he wanted to put in policies, and they did become law. And here we have it today, just on these issues alone, these 6 issues. The Founding Fathers said transportation. They said watch the currency. They said Buy America. And they said we need to be ahead with research and patents and be in the cutting edge of technology. What if President Barack Obama's American Jobs Act had been taken up by the Republican leadership that controlled this House? What if they had listened to the Founding Fathers and actually implemented what the President wanted to put in place? 1.3 million, 1,300,000 jobs, perhaps as much as 1,900,000 jobs Americans will be working today. The great what-if question of our time. What if they had listened to the Founding Fathers? Mr. Ellison, I know you have more to say, so please go for it.
Well, Congressman, if we listen to the Founding Fathers, we'd be quite a ways ahead. It's interesting today in the political rhetoric you hear, some people claim the Founding Fathers, but they don't claim the real Founding Fathers, the ones who actually had the foresight to make America a strong economic country by making sure that the government played an important role in making sure our economy was working by promoting transportation, patents, currency protection, and things like that. But I would say that, you know, as we work here today and as we think about all of the things that our nation needs, none are more important than putting Americans back to work, I think. And the American Jobs Act is a plan set forth by the President, and he's set this forth at a time when he's reaching his hand out, he's extending his hand, he's trying to get the Republican majority in the House to work with him, but apparently they just won't do so because they have ideological and political considerations. One of those ideological things is that they just don't think the government is any good. They don't think the government can do any good. They don't think the government can help. And so we see proposals and amendments to simply eliminate the federal role out of transportation. And, of course, we've seen eliminate the federal role out of environmental protection. And we've seen a whole host of things like this. You would think that the reason we have high unemployment is because of job-killing regulations. They love this refrain. I'm sure Frank Luntz is very proud. He's a pollster who comes up with clever phrasing that they use a lot. But it's not job-killing regulations. Any small business person will tell you the key to their success is customers. The key to customers is people who have jobs, who have some money to spend. You got no customers, and your customers are broke, then they're not going to buy your cakes, your pies, then those folks are not going to be able to pay the taxes they need to keep our valued public employees working, teachers, firefighters, police officers, public health nurses, people who make the water and the meat safe to eat. And you know, what we argue for, they like to throw around terms like socialism, but what we argue for is a mixed economy. a balance between the private sector and government, which enhances the performance of both, all in service to the American people. So today, I am in favor of us getting a strong, long-term, 6-year transportation bill. I am absolutely in favor of helping our students who are fearing that education is getting out of their economic reach. Absolutely, we have to be there to reform currency, to level the playing field with China. We should buy American. What's wrong with buying American? I think buying American's good. I rather prefer buying American. In fact, whenever I get a product and it says Made in America, I get a warm fuzzy all over.
But wouldn't you love to go into Kmart or Target and see on the shelves, Made in America?
Made in America.
Made in America. That's why the currency reform is so important.
If it was made in America, maybe we could make it in America.
Well, Americans would make it.
Yeah.
If we made it in America.
That's right.
We'd have those middle-class jobs.
You know it.
That's where it is. Let me just do something here. This is part of the Mr. Ellison, thank you very much. I know you've got a plane. You've got to get back to Minneapolis. Thank you so very much for joining us. This is part of the Democratic agenda. This is something we've been working on now for well over 2 years. And we call it Make It in America. This is rebuilding the American middle class. This is about the American middle class coming back. Over the last 20 years, we've seen a decline in American manufacturing. In the early 90s, we were a little more than 19 million, almost 20 million Americans were in the manufacturing sector. Those were middle-class jobs. You can go to work, earn a living, live a middle-class life, buy your bass boat, you know, take the kids on a vacation. Today, we're just over 11 million middle-class manufacturing jobs in America. So looking at this dismal situation a couple of years ago, shortly after I arrived here, we began looking at, what do you do about this? Why did this happen? Why is it that the American manufacturing sector declined? We did our studies. We did the economic analysis. But mostly we looked at public policy. We looked at the laws of this land. We looked at what was going on in the public policy sector. And what we found was the policies of this nation discouraged manufacturing and, in fact, rewarded American corporations that would offshore jobs. Literally, actually giving American corporations a reduction in their taxes for every job they offshored. Total about $16 billion a year. I know, you don't believe that. How could there be such a policy? That was my question. What? You mean to tell me that the tax policy of the United States gives a tax break to American corporations when they ship a job offshore? Can't be. In fact, it was. And so, in the last year, the last months of the Democrats' control of this House, in 2010, we undertook to change that. We put a bill on this floor that would eliminate $12 billion of that $16 billion tax break that American corporations had for offshoring jobs. It passed without one Republican vote. Not one member of the Republican Party voted to end a tax break for American companies that offshored jobs. The Senate took it up. It passed. President Obama signed that legislation. Public policy matters. Public policy matters a great deal. We've talked here today about the Buy American provisions. Been in law for 30, 40 years. Basically say, if it's our taxpayer dollars, that ought to be used to buy American equipment. Over the years, probably beginning in the 80s and carrying on, those provisions began to gain loopholes. one after another, so that at the end of 2010, the loophole was 12-lane freeway that you could drive any project through and buy whatever you wanted to buy from wherever it came from. So much so that in San Francisco, the Oakland Bay Bridge between Oakland and San Francisco had to be rebuilt because of earthquake safety issues. Some of it fell down in the Loma Prieta earthquake. The largest construction project, public works project ever in California. The main central steel column for a uniquely designed bridge, $1 billion or more. Chinese steel, Chinese welders, 6,000 jobs in China to save 10%. Turns out the steel was faulty, the welds were faulty, the jobs were still in China, and the inspectors were Chinese. If we had a Buy American provision that meant anything at all, we would have had 6,000 jobs in America. The inspectors would have been American, and there would be American jobs. So my legislation says this. H.R. House Resolution 613 says that if it is your tax money, it's going to be spent on American-made equipment, American-made steel, and the jobs will be in America. Where's that bill? Hasn't even been taken up for a hearing in the Transportation Committee. We're nibbling around the edges here. Every bill that comes to this floor that's relevant to this issue, we try to shoehorn into it a Buy American provision. We try to increase the Buy America laws. We try to make certain that your tax money is going to be spent on American-made equipment. That's our agenda. Have we been successful? No. No, we've not. When the half-baked, worthless transportation bill that was brought to the floor by our Republican colleagues who could not even get agreement in their own caucus, we tried to put a provision, an amendment on. It was rejected. It was rejected. Americans want to go to work. Public policy matters. Will your tax dollars be spent buying Chinese steel? Give you another example. In Los Angeles, they went out to buy new light rail cars. 2 bids were the final bids. One by Siemens, yes, a German company, who has a manufacturing plant for light rail cars in Sacramento, California. Siemens said that their light rail cars would have a minimum of 80% American-made content. A Japanese company came in and said, we'll do it for 60%. There was a slight difference. I think it was about 2%. Difference in the bids. So what did the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, do? They chose the Japanese company. American jobs lost immediately in Sacramento as a result of that decision. Now, whose money is going to be spent buying those cars, those light rail cars? Whose money is it? Your money. It's your tax money. Good for Japan. They're going to get some jobs. Bad for Sacramento. Layoffs already occurred, and more to come. You want another example? I'll just use California. That's where I'm from. The Bay Area Rapid Transit System, BART. $3.2 billion for new trains over 10 years. $3.2 billion. Two bids. One, Bombardier, fine Canadian company, said they would build them with 66% American content. Okay? That's good. Not good enough, because Alstom, a French company, said they would build them with 90% American-made content. Yes, a little more expensive, but we're talking $1 billion of American jobs here. The Bay Area Rapid Transit System said, well, the federal government says it's 60%, and we're going to have to go with 66. I said, and thousands of Californians said, and New Yorkers, where most of these jobs would be, Alstom has a plant in New York to manufacture light rail and heavy rail cars. They said, wait, let's take 2 months, and let's rebid this. And let's see what we can do. Alstom was prepared to lower their bid if they would have had an opportunity. And $1 billion of American jobs are not here. They're somewhere else around the world. Public policy matters. Public policy matters. I think it's about time to wrap up here. So I'm going to go back to where we started. What if the House of Representatives, under the control of our Republican colleagues, totally under their control, and the Senate, also under the control of the Republicans, because it takes 60 votes there, what if the President's American Jobs Act had been taken up and passed? We'll modify it. And don't forget, it was fully paid for, 100% paid for. No increase in the deficit. Economists said clearly 1,300,000 jobs would immediately result from the President's American Jobs Act. What if? What does it mean to you and your community? Would that road have been built? Would you have had the job paving that road, repairing and painting that bridge? Down at the local school, painting the school, cleaning up the playgrounds, putting new toilets into the restrooms, or specifically, a new laboratory in the high school. Not laboratory, but laboratory. What if? What if we had put aside partisan politics, and keep this in mind, the Republican leader of the Senate, the day or shortly after President Obama was inaugurated, he said that his #1 goal was to make sure that this was a one-term president. So how do you do that? Well, when the President proposes an American Jobs Act that would employ 1,300,000 Americans immediately, you make certain that it doesn't become law. You slow it down. Everything has to be 60 votes in the Senate. And here in this House, you do not even take it up. You don't allow a vote on it. You don't do a transportation bill. You don't take the $50 billion injected immediately into infrastructure, totally paid for. You don't do it, even though that would employ tens of thousands of Americans. You make certain that the 288,000 teachers that have been laid off across America are not rehired, so that my daughter's classroom is not 22 students, it's 35 students. How do you destroy a president? You make certain that this economy doesn't move. You take his American Jobs Act and you sit on it. That's what's happened. The great what if. What if we'd put Americans back to work? Yeah, maybe Obama would get reelected. Maybe I'd get reelected. But I tell you this, Americans would be working. Americans would be working. What if? Mr. Speaker, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair lays before the House the following enrolled bills.
H.R. 5890, an act to correct a technical error in Public Law 112-122.
Does the gentleman from California have a motion? Does the gentleman from California have a motion?
Of course I do. You ought to go home. Madam Speaker, I note that having accomplished absolutely nothing this week on jobs, we may as well adjourn, and I move to adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. According to the House, stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, June 12, 2012.
Will the House